Today's critique focuses on two enterprise technology pieces, arguing that a data orchestration layer is the missing architectural link required to fix the structural gap between data generating source systems and data consuming platforms. And diving right into the feedback, the conceptual framework of the data orchestration layer is exceptionally clear, but the argument risks remaining purely theoretical without concrete real world examples of this architecture in action.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, looking at how the author defines the components of true orchestration here, things like the canonical data model, continuous validation, and intelligent routing, the definitions themselves are airtight.
Oh, totally. The author clearly knows the architecture inside and out.
Right. But the weakness, however, is that the text just lacks tangible operational grounding. It relies way too heavily on broad terminology, you know?
Yeah, like seeing phrases like transaction data and compliance platforms repeated constantly.
Exactly. We see those broad strokes, but we never actually see the gears turning. And without showing how this works on a granular level, the concept just remains, well, suspended in the clouds. I mean, pragmatic enterprise architects are going to struggle to visualize the actual mechanism firing in real time.
Well, and I want to unpack the mechanics of that weakness for a second, because the author is making a very bold claim here. They're saying the structural gap cannot be closed by simply upgrading your source systems or, buying a better analytics platform.
Right.
But at keeping the explanation abstract, the reader is essentially forced to do the heavy lifting of imagining the deployment themselves. So the suggestion for improvement here is to introduce a brief, highly specific scenario that traces the journey of a single, recognizable data entity as it moves through the orchestration layer.
Yeah, we need to physically show the transformation taking place, like millisecond by millisecond.
Right. So let's explore what that looks like in practice.
Well, instead of vaguely referencing transaction data, the text could walk the reader through a specific transaction. Imagine a cross-border procurement order originating in a legacy ERP system. Let's say SAP S/4HANA, for example.
Okay, yeah, that's a solid example.
The text needs to show exactly how the orchestration layer intercepts this specific order the exact moment it's generated. The reader really needs to see the layer grab that bespoke, highly proprietary native formatting of the SAP output and then instantly translate it into the canonical data model.
Wait, let me just stop you there because the canonical data model is a term that gets thrown around a lot, and the text mentions it, but it doesn't quite land why it's the magic bullet here.
I see what you mean.
Yeah, because if I understand the architecture correctly, translating to a canonical model is the exact bottleneck that causes the two-endpoint trap the author mentions later. Because without this layer, every new piece of software you buy has to learn how to speak fluent SAP, fluent Salesforce, fluent Workday.
Exactly, yeah. The translation burden is entirely on the endpoints.
Right. So by showing this single cross-border procurement order being translated in the middle, the author proves the mechanism actually works.
That is precisely the mechanism. And, it doesn't stop at just translation. Crucially, the text should then demonstrate how the layer instantly validates that now standardized data against a specific regional tax mandate.
Oh, wow. Like dynamically?
Yeah, dynamically. Let's say it checks European VAT compliance rules, right? While simultaneously routing the payload in milliseconds to both a government compliance node and an internal AI anomaly detection system. By tracking one single highly complex data payload, the abstract theory of intelligent routing suddenly becomes a tangible, undeniable utility.
To put this in perspective, reading the material as it currently stands feels a bit like having someone explain the concept of standardized shipping containers to you.
That's a good way to put it.
Right? Like, the theory is sound, but to make it real, we don't need more theory. We need to see a specific shipment of electronics arrive at an international shipping port on a messy, unregulated legacy truck. We need to see it get instantly repackaged into a standardized container, clear customs validation in real time, and get routed to two different cargo ships simultaneously without slowing down the port.
I love that shipping port analogy because it really highlights the necessity of the mechanism. But I also want to anticipate the author's potential hesitation here.
Okay, what kind of hesitation?
Well, Is there a risk that diving into a highly specific SAP S/4HANA cross-border transaction might alienate readers who just don't use SAP? Or maybe readers who are focused on like healthcare data rather than supply chain logistics?
A granular, mechanically sound breakdown of a complex financial transaction being orchestrated perfectly, I immediately project that competence onto my own problems.
Oh, I see. You map it to your own use case.
Exactly. I think, well, if this layer can untangle a multinational tax compliance routing issue in milliseconds, it can probably handle my patient records just fine.
That makes sense.
But that realization actually creates a new problem for the author. Because even if the author paints a perfect picture of that single transaction flowing seamlessly through the port, the reader's immediate psychological response is going to be defensive. They're going to look at that perfect, frictionless transaction and immediately think, yeah, sure, the port is great, but you haven't seen my legacy trucks.
Which brings us to the next point. Emphasizing the endpoint trap perfectly illustrates the current problem, yet the narrative overlooks the practical friction of migrating from legacy point-to-point integrations to a new orchestration layer.
Yeah, which is a critical vulnerability here. I mean, the text does a compelling job describing the two-endpoint trap, and it thoroughly dismantles the idea that a data lake alone can solve structural data quality issues.
Oh, definitely. I actually think the argument that data lakes merely relocate the integration problem downstream rather than solving it is brilliantly articulated.
It really is. But the weakness is that the text presents a completely binary state of existence. An organization either lives in integration chaos or it has this beautifully functioning missing layer. It completely ignores the messy, high-risk reality of enterprise IT migration.
Right. It implies that an enterprise can just, build this layer, flip a switch, and suddenly everything gets easier. But any seasoned enterprise architect reading this knows that unpicking decades of legacy ETL pipelines is an operational nightmare.
Oh, a total nightmare.
And if the text glosses over the migration, skeptical IT leaders are just going to tune out. They will assume the author simply doesn't understand the blast radius of touching legacy infrastructure. So the suggestion for improvement here is to explicitly acknowledge the implementation journey.
Yeah, the text must add a section that directly addresses the transition phase, right? To prove to the reader that the author understands enterprise change management and is offering a pragmatic path forward.
Exactly. But how do they do that without getting bogged down?
Well, I hear you suggesting a pragmatic path, but I have to push back slightly to figure out what that actually looks like in the writing. If we tell the reader to adopt this layer, how do we suggest they do it without sounding like we are pitching a massive, terrifying rip and replace of their entire business?
That is exactly the friction we need to address. One highly effective approach would be to give a concrete example of a strangler fig migration pattern. The author could advise readers to leave their legacy point-to-point integrations running in the background. You just don't touch them.
Just leave them alone entirely?
Leave them alone. Instead, you build the data orchestration layer alongside them, and you slowly route new APIs or new data streams through the orchestration layer, gradually strangling the old system out of existence over a period of years.
But wait, let's unpack that. Is there a risk that by suggesting they run two parallel systems during a strangler fig migration, we are actually pitching them a temporary state of doubled integration chaos?
Oh, that's a fair point.
Right? Because now they have to monitor the old broken spaghetti code and the new orchestration layer simultaneously. How does the author reassure the reader that this transition phase won't, bankrupt their IT budget or break the systems it's actively trying to replace?
That is a phenomenal counterargument, and it's exactly the kind of pushback the author needs to preempt in the text. To answer your question, if the strangler fig feels too heavy, the concrete example could shift to a pilot-based approach driven by an external forcing function.
Okay, a pilot-based approach. Tell me more.
Well, instead of taking on the whole architecture, the text could recommend adopting the orchestration layer to solve just one upcoming isolated problem. For instance, if an organization is facing a new real-time regulatory compliance mandate in a specific European country next quarter,
Which happens all the time.
exactly. The author could suggest using the orchestration layer strictly for that single pipeline.
Ah, I see. So you don't use it to fix the past. You use it to build the future.
Exactly. You leave the legacy spaghetti alone, you prove the orchestration architecture works on that one new compliance mandate, You get the quick win, you establish the canonical data model for just that one sliver of the business, and then, organically, as other systems need to be upgraded, you gradually route more traffic through the new layer.
So the transition becomes demand-driven rather than a top-down mandate.
Precisely.
You know, by leaning into the difficulty of the transition, the argument actually gains credibility. If the author directly says, look, untangling your current integration spaghetti is going to be incredibly difficult and risky, so don't do it. Here is a safe, phased way to deploy this architecture on a net new project without taking down your core operational systems. The reader will immediately trust the architectural advice that follows.
Right, because it validates the battle-scarred IT leader who has survived failed digital transformations before. It demonstrates deep empathy for the reader's operational reality. And, that empathy is what separates a good white paper from a true strategic mandate.
Absolutely.
But this brings up a larger structural question about the two distinct pieces of material we are critiquing today. We have the technical story straight now. We know how to show the mechanism with the SAP example, and we know how to address the migration friction. But how is this technical story being packaged and delivered to the buyer?
Yeah, that intent mismatch is exactly what we need to tackle next. The core thesis is highly robust across both formats. However, the heavy overlap in content between the article and the blog post dilutes the unique strategic value of each piece.
Yeah, when we look at the submission, we have the longer article titled The Missing Layer, Why Data Orchestration is the Strategic Core of the Intelligent Enterprise. And then the shorter blog post, you have an ERP, you have a data lake, you're still missing the most important layer.
Both titles are great, honestly.
They are, and both pieces are exceptionally well written. But the glaring weakness is that they hit the exact same structural beats. They both define the two-endpoint trap, they both dismiss the data lake as an incomplete solution, and they both outline the principles of validation before distribution.
I noticed that too. If you look closely at the section discussing the data lake, the overlap is almost word for word. In the blog post, it says a data lake is a brilliant solution to a storage problem, but not a data quality problem.
Yeah.
And then in the main article, it makes almost the exact same argument about consuming systems requiring denormalized data, using the exact same metaphors about swamps and downstream pollution. Because they share so much identical DNA, they just end up stepping on each other's toes.
And think about the journey of the reader here. If an architect clicks the blog post on LinkedIn, gets hooked by the premise, and then fills out a form to download the white paper article, they are going to feel like they are rereading the exact same document with just slightly different subheadings.
Exactly.
They aren't moving deeper down a content funnel. They are basically just circling the same drain.
Right. It's an issue of buyer psychology. The real issue is intent mismatch. When an enterprise architect clicks a blog post, they are in a scouting mindset. They are looking for validation of their daily pain. They want to know if someone else understands why their compliance reporting is always 2 weeks late.
Spot on.
But when they download an article or a white paper, they have shifted into a building mindset. They are looking for defensible architecture, mechanical blueprints, and migration strategies to take to their CTO to secure budget. By putting the architectural blueprints in the blog, the author is handing a highly complex schematic to someone who is just looking for a symptom checker.
So the suggestion for improvement here is to distinctly separate the purpose, scope, and angle of each asset to serve different stages of that psychological journey.
Concrete examples of how to do this are crucial here. The author should violently edit the blog post to act purely as a top-of-funnel diagnostic hook. They should cut the deep architectural theory, like the canonical data model, the intelligent routing, out of the blog entirely.
Just cut it completely?
Completely. Instead, they should focus almost exclusively on expanding the section currently titled, "The 5 Signs Your Architecture is Missing This Layer." The blog's only job should be to help the readers self-identify their pain points. It should just poke the bruise.
But if we take all the theory out of the blog, is there a danger that it will feel too lightweight? Like that the technical audience will read it and just think it's marketing fluff?
Not if the symptoms are painfully, excruciatingly specific. If the blog says, sign number 3 that you are missing this layer, your data science team spends 70% of their week writing bespoke Python scripts just to clean the data lake before they can run a single predictive model. That isn't fluff.
Oh yeah, that hurts just to hear.
Right? That is a deeply technical observation of a broken process. The reader needs to read the blog post and think, wow, we are experiencing all 5 of these signs. This author has a hidden camera in our IT department.
Yeah,
And then the blog post just ends simply by saying you are missing the data orchestration layer. To see the mechanical blueprint for how to build it, read the full article.
that is a brilliant way to segment the value, and that really allows the longer piece to truly shine. The author should reserve the detailed mechanics, the principles over products framework, the deep dive into continuous validation workflows, that new SAP S/4HANA transaction example we discussed, and the nuanced pilot migration strategy strictly for the longer form article.
Exactly.
That article must be positioned as the authoritative, mechanical deep dive that the reader graduates to only after realizing they have the disease described in the blog.
Yeah, if we view the blog post as the diagnosis and the article as the prescription, they become a really powerful 1-2 punch. Right now, they are both just trying to be the whole pharmacy.
Exactly. And when the reader opens that full article, they shouldn't have to read through the diagnosis again. They are already sold on the pain. They just traded their email address for the cure. By strictly separating the content this way, the author honors the reader's time, matches their psychological intent, and provides a highly satisfying intellectual progression. The blog agitates the problem, the article delivers the complex architectural solution.
This has been a deeply constructive look at how to refine these already powerful arguments. So, just to briefly recap the major structural takeaways from today's critique. First, we need to ground the high-level architecture with a granular millisecond by millisecond transaction example.
Right, show that cross-border SAP order moving through the system, translating into the canonical data model, and clearing validation to prove the theory works in practice.
Second, we must validate the reader's skepticism by addressing the messy reality of enterprise migration.
Yeah, perhaps utilizing a strangler fig or a targeted single-use case pilot approach to prove you understand their operational friction.
And finally, we need to distinctly separate the blog and the article into a clear diagnostic and prescriptive funnel so they complement rather than repeat one another.
The clarity and structural logic of the original pieces are genuinely commendable. The author has really managed to articulate a highly complex, historically dry enterprise challenge with incredible lucidity. With these pieces, the foundation is already rock solid. We warmly invite the listener to apply these structural adjustments, flesh out those mechanical examples, and submit the revised material back in for a future critique.
We would absolutely love to see how it evolves. Remember, no matter how elegant the engineering of a concept looks on paper, the true test of any framework is whether you can convince a skeptical architect to actually build it. We look forward to seeing where this journey takes you next.